first heard about it, though I didn't contribute much, but I followed all the action quite close as to how maps have been helping them and what are the different things that they could do with maps. And that's what inspired me to, move ahead and explore OpenStreetMap in general. So my journey began as a mapper. I was lucky when I was exploring about OpenStreetMap. I bumped into folks from Mapbox. Mapbox has a very special place because it sort of brought me in phase with OpenStreetMap. There's a lot that I've learned, and I was lucky to get mentors and folks who were so good with OpenStreetMap to like introduce me, teach me the nitty gritties and different things that I could do. That was when I started mapping and adding, and there are workflows and interacting with turn restrictions. Like the mapper mind of mine still sticks to it. Like I see a road and the first thing I think of is like, hey, how is that map in OpenStreetMap? Is this a complex junction? It is not, and so much more. So that mapper in me always lives, and there's so much more that I've learned as you go ahead. And I think that sort of laid the foundation for me to interact with the amazing community of contributors, which is like spread across the globe, and gave me an opportunity to play a role and be a part of it. And one such opening was when I joined Weekly OSM. When Jessica, maybe the next slide, please. So Weekly OSM, I think a lot of you know about it. Is a weekly newsletter. It is shared across the globe in 8 different languages, and it's completely volunteer driven. I mean, indeed, last week completed its 500th edition, which is amazing. But this was one such opportunity where I got to interact with folks from different cultures, different communities. There was so much more to learn, and it also gave me a deeper insight of how OpenStreetMap works. And that was one of my first interactions which I had with the community. And I realized that whatever we share or do actually impacts, and there's so much work around the world that goes on this forum. And I used to work on the English edition, but there are so many folks who work on different languages, and it's exciting to just be a part of it. And which in turn introduced me and led me to be a part of the OSMF working group. So I realized that while I was interacting with all of these folks, there are so many communication channels. Even through my work at Mapbox and in general, when I would interact, I realized that there's so much more that could be done. And what is the best way to do it? We're just joining communications working group. It initially was scary. To be honest, I was not, I was like, should I be a part of it? How would it be? Will I be involved? Will my ideas be accepted? How can I contribute? And all those questions that were coming through me. But as and when I got involved and with the folks, with the team, uh, I realized that there's so much more to do. And being a part of this actually gave me a voice, not just to represent myself, but to represent a lot of others in the world, or communities which maybe I could see and I could change. So that was one such part. Like when I joined the Weekly OSM, this was like just getting into communications working group. And then after that, I think one step behind. Yes, no, I think one more. Yes. So as I participated and got active onto communicating with the different communities in OSM, mappers, be it everyone in the mailing list, and started exploring more channels, I realized that there were so many learnings that I got, and and sharing that with a broader audience would be the right step. Uh, Initially I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I have to, would it be a good talk, would it not be a good talk. So I think a pretty major role was played by a lot of folks who were supporting me, and they were like, no, you should share these things, you should be talking more about it. I mean, honestly, there were so many internal conversations when I gave my first talk. I still remember my heart was thumping, and I was like, should I be talking? How would the reception be? Will I have a lot of questions? There were so many internal conversations. But then once you are on the stage and when you share your work, there are so many people in the world who actually appreciate and tell about things that, oh, we didn't know about it, I'm so glad that we brought this up. And suddenly you feel that you're not just speaking for yourself, but you're speaking for so many other people who are experiencing something similar or are sharing something similar, and are doing so many amazing things around me. So that was when I started, like, not just encouraging others but everyone around me to like talk, share ideas, and be a part of, like, just not the conferences but like many other things which OSM community does. And that also helped me run a lot of other events across. And I think one of the major stepping stones, when I actually attended my first State of the Map that was in Brussels, I was like, what would it take to actually organize a conference of this kind? And luckily in 2018 I got a chance to be a part of the organizing team for State of the Map Asia. And honestly, it was nerve-wracking because it has so much work to do. I had a next level of appreciation for everyone who's organizing conferences, because you suddenly want to cater to everyone who is a part of it. Like, you want it to be diverse, you want to make sure that everyone feels welcome, you want to make sure that everyone has something of their interest. And to make that, there was a huge learning experience. And honestly, I have been in room with so many men who have a tremendous experience in this field, and sometimes I'm the only woman there. And I was scared, but to be like, I was lucky. And to be honest, everyone in the room did make sure that I actually put forward my view. I could talk, I could share my opinions, I could say that, hey, this is something that could go better, this is something that could, be done better, I can take a lead on this. And I think just being with so many folks gave me that confidence. And honestly, we could, successfully organize this conference. We had diverse, like, we had a lot of women participants, we had around 300 people who we hosted in Bangalore, and we had good talk, we got good feedback. So that was one such experience which made me so much more stronger, and organizing community events, understanding what each of them want, how to like encourage more people to participate. There have been times when I've actually like reached out to folks and be like, hey, this is an amazing idea, you should talk about it, let's, like, I can help you work on it. So it helped me, frame things, and brought me to a new level where I was like, okay, there's so much more that can be done. And I think the journey onward after organizing State of the Map was basically, stepping into a completely new community, which is Southeast Asia. Uh, as we know, like, OpenStreetMap was something that was started by, hobby mappers and all of that. But when we step into Southeast Asia or Asia in general, it's a different game. The communities are relatively new. There's so much more that, they're new, so they are trying to explore. And there's so much more that we could be, working around. And that's when I got an opportunity to work in GeoStars, which is a program that I run for Grab, where I interact with the universities across Southeast Asia, and have students learn about OpenStreetMap, how can they map, how can they measure quality, what they can do with OSM data, and a lot of other things that, empower them. And then training the trainers. So basically, they then they then run mapathons, and this is one such way of growing the community in this region. And this was one. I mean, this is something which is very close to my heart. We have close to 15 to 20 universities, and we're hoping that we have more people, in this like join us and learn about OSM and help the community grow in this region. And I think out of all the experiences, like from being a mapper to being in weekly OSM and the OSMF community, I mean, communications working group, and running these events, not just limited to the universities, but, the local communities and all of that, I, with a lot of, it was scary to be standing for the OSM elections this year, the 2019 elections, where I was the only woman candidate. But honestly, I was not sure if I want to stand. But on it, like, with the support that I got, sometimes the back channels, a lot of community members who got back to me, and they're like, no, you can do. I had a couple of, internal conversations saying, do I deserve, do it, is it going to be okay? I wasn't scared of losing, but I was scared of how will I be perceived as a participant. What would I be doing? Will I be validated? And I was overwhelmed. But when I actually saw the channel, the support that I got from the allies, the encouragement that I've got internally as well as externally, as well as through back channels, it actually gave me the courage, saying that maybe it's just one step, winning or not, being on the board or not, but just being able to share the work that we've been doing, and sharing, like just being participating in that gave me such a huge exposure, and also gave me the confidence that maybe next time when this comes up, I would be able to, participate and represent more women. And honestly, I'm hoping that in the coming elections we'll have more participation from not just women but all the minorities and different things that we can do. And I one biggest realization that I had is that it's always the support that we get from everyone makes you feel so good. So even after not being able to be on the top for the elections, I was happy because I was like, I know what I need to be doing next year. I know what are the things and what are the steps and what are the activities that I should be focusing, such that it'll encourage not just me but others. And one such goal is that to have more women participation in the coming elections and in general OpenStreetMap ecosystem. That's a little bit of my story. Hoping to hear more questions from your side later on. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Janelle. I really appreciate that, and some of the key messages about persistence, but also insecurities that we can face in entering into some of these conversations and not knowing what space we occupy. So I appreciate you in your confidence in entering into these spaces and navigating them, because it can be very difficult and intimidating, but so important to be able to set the example for other women as well. That they too can do it and assume these levels of leadership. So really appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you so much. Natalie is going to speak a little bit about her experience and journey as well with OSM Mali. So Natalie, would you like to go ahead and take it off next?
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Hi everyone again. I'm Astu Nathalie Sidibe from Mali. I'm a human resource manager, but I'm currently studying geomatics and urban planning at the Department of Geography in Mali, thanks to all I've been learning from OpenStreetMap. So I heard about OpenStreetMap 5 years ago in December 2014. So since that day, I've been very involved in Mali and also in some West African countries. So I've been doing a lot of activities with my community and in collaboration with OSM community. Next slide. So in my engagement, I've been focusing in free areas. In these free areas, we have trainings, because I've been telling myself that training is the best way to spread OpenStreetMap, to learn other people how to use OpenStreetMap, how to make data, how to review it, and that's why I've been organizing a lot of training sessions in Mali with students, with government agencies, with public and private enterprises. Also, I've been focusing on Mapathon, organizing Mapathon party and data collection in urban and rural area. And I've also setting up Youth Mapper, the first Youth Mapper chapter in Mali. And some time ago, because we have noticed that there are less women engaged in OpenStreetMap everywhere, and especially in Mali and in West Africa. So we decided together with the OSM community in West Africa, we decided together to initiate a program. We call it Girls Map, So Girls Map, we have today 11 countries who participate to this initiative in order to engage more women. So we have already organized some training session in Madagascar, in Togo, in Benin, in Ivory Coast, Guinea, and next in the next following month and year we're going to organize some camp for some cap to camp for there's girls we have already training. I've also initiated a carto camp here in Mali for universities. So since 2016, each year we have a carto camp for students. So we take 5 days for training them, for learning how to use data collection tools, open source software, and okay. So that's my focus areas for spreading OpenStreetMap. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Sorry, I was delayed in furthering some of these slides to be able to show some of the illustrations for the work that you've been doing. Wondering if you could just spend a second talking about kind of some of the reception that you've received within Mali, trying to engage some girls and women in mapping. Have there been any challenges that you've experienced in your efforts?
Yeah, there we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of challenges here. So we have because we are in Mali, especially we are in a Muslim country, so it's not easy to engage women because there are a lot of things who is a barrier for them. So it's also not well seen. People, women who are very engaged in public life are not well seen sometimes. So that's why most of the women, girls are not engaged. We have also how I can say, so we have culture, we have custom, we have religious belief, we have also lot of things. We have lot of challenges here.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. I think we'll come back to some of these questions a little bit later on because I'm sure that there might be some similarities for both attendees and other panelists. I see Janelle is shaking her head and has some alignment there as well. So let's move to our last and final speaker, Selena, to share a little bit about her experiences in the context of the Philippines as well. And then we'll dive into, I think, some of these larger questions about how we come to some solutions to address some of the challenges that women are facing across the world. So Selena.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Selena Agaton again, and I run Map the Philippines, or MapPH for short. I moved back to the Philippines in about 2014. I was still kind of working back and forth because I essentially grew up in Jakarta and Manila, but spent most of my life in Toronto, and actually studied equity studies, which includes gender in there. So it's sort of the relationship between gender and culture and community and data has always interested me. And so at the time, I heard about OpenStreetMap through TechSoup. I used to organize Net Squared out of Toronto and was part of the free and open source community since about 2006. And out of that, we had a challenge, and Ushahidi was actually one of the finalists. And I was on the judging panel to actually award them their very first grant and learn about OpenStreetMap that way. And kind of thought a lot of the data work that I was doing in Toronto was trying to understand how funding was provided to NGOs and how to provide a more stabilized structure for funding using data. And so that was actually working with about 7,000 NGOs and categorizing what they needed and where, and then reshaping how donors were given that money based on the priorities that were mentioned by the NGOs, and trying to make that a more long-term versus a 3 to 5 to 1 month, sometimes even granting cycles, just for more sustainability in the sector. And then the Haiti earthquake happened, and was part of the crisis commons community. And since Canada had the largest population of Haitians, participated in Crisis Camp Toronto. So OpenStreetMap for me really helps visualize in such a powerful way data, and also helps personalize the data for communities. And especially because the tools are free and open source and makes data collection so much easier, it really became fascinating to me to understand that intersection. Next slide, Jessica. So at first, we started out trying to understand what communities, what their context was, what kind of data they provided, and then what kind of funding they were exposed to. Because typically the funders kind of decide what to fund, and then they put out a call that goes out to a limited community, or oftentimes the lucky communities that have relationships with those funders. So I really wanted to have an intermediary, which was OpenStreetMap and the data, to then kind of have it be a more community-driven approach versus political trends or whatever new technology happens to be in fashion, and to really root it in the communities and to change that short-term funding model. So I worked in Toronto on this for about 2 years, and wanting to come back to the Philippines, since I'm Filipino, to really prototype this new model of resilience, of working together across all the sectors. So all our projects involve the government, business, NGO, academia, and local community leaders. And so then I moved home to the Philippines right after the super typhoon Haiyan. Next slide. And got involved with the local OpenStreetMap community. And this was actually the 10th anniversary of OpenStreetMap that we celebrated. And you'll see the transition, because there's a lot of dudes in this picture, and you'll see how our community has changed since then. So our work in the Philippines, because the Philippines is really a great laboratory for testing resilience, because we have such high risks across all the sustainable development goals. And yet we're such active users of social media, and there's such a diaspora of Filipinos all around the world that can be it's still an untapped resource for improving civic and community engagement. So our initial project worked with World Bank on publicizing road construction projects as well as current roads, because that information is not easily accessible, or you have to pay for it. And then that's where the data came into play, wanting to understand how the different sustainable development goal risks came into play, like climate change, food security, disaster, poverty, and so on. That these are all really complex issues, and yet so many organizations still work in silos. So tourism is handled separately from nutrition, separately from job creation. When I feel that we really have to work better together these days with resources and also geopolitics and so many challenges in the world, including our current situation with coronavirus. So having all that rich data across all the sectors and having OpenStreetMap at the core, being able to have communities on the ground to actually have a voice and to make invisible communities visible became our real focus. Next slide. So since then, we've taught about 800 mappers and worked throughout the country. And you'll see there's some awesome groups here. Since then, there have been the amazing Geo Ladies group, mental health awareness, MapX does mapping of LGBTQ and HIV testing facilities. So I've been helping support and mentor different mapping groups, including helping set up several youth mappers chapters here. Again, the more the merrier with mapping, and having that integrate into all the sectors that we work with has been the real thrust of our work, and continuing forward as well. Next slide. And so we just completed the biggest project yet, where we were working with over 200 staff in the conflict and highly food insecure area of Mindanao. And we conducted about 7,000 surveys there, trying to understand rural agriculture and also completing the first gender gap mapping study for World Bank. And out of this whole process that took over a year, I began to notice behaviors even among the trainers as well as the participants. And so what I started to do in our mapping workshops, and I do this for every workshop now, is actually separate the women from men. And we asked them, we print an OpenStreetMap, asked them to draw what kind of missing infrastructure for that particular task we're focused on. And time again, when I separate women and men from different groups, we get a lot more productive data out of it. And women are very, very excited to contribute. They often are completing other tasks, like for the picture that you see here. We had asked them to show us where the missing agriculture infrastructure was in their community. And then they started mapping schools and hospitals. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is just for agriculture. But they said, we need so much. And so we've just really scratched the surface with this community. And also with the women being so eager and so motivated to share data from their communities and actually be part of the process, because oftentimes they don't even have the time or are busy taking care of so many things to participate in consultations, let alone the mapping workshops that we do. So out of that gender gap mapping study, we came across some major discoveries where in the poorest communities, some women were traveling more than 800 kilometers a week by foot, because usually in rural communities, the first kind of road they plan on is a farm to market road, which is usually involving men on trucks and on concrete roads. And yet we all know women are at the center of every community, taking care of things for the household. We understood that they had even more jobs than the men, 3 jobs, aside from all the household tasks and healthcare tasks and taking kids to school and going to the bank and so on and so on and so on. And so it's really looking at infrastructure in a new way and saying, why are we planning infrastructure in this way when women are so central to prosperity, and especially to contributing livelihood to the family, where we can better track these things by having women at the center, at the very center of that. So we're expanding in the Philippines as well as in Indonesia, and seeing that there's such a gap in the data down to community engagement, down to the true impact. Next slide. We're actually now involved in actual job creation. So realizing that there's so many challenges in the workforce now, and there's so much exploitation going around the world, and especially with all the communities that produce food and manufacture, we wanted to help create new jobs that were equitable, that had dignity, that paid better wages, and also help protect the workforce from the future. And especially in the Philippines, as many of you have probably met a Filipino, we send most of our most talented workers abroad because there's not enough livable wage opportunities locally. So we're directly involved in agriculture, so sustainable agriculture, sustainable tourism, since those are the easiest economic drivers, just like in many developing nations, and job creation for mapping and data science, seeing that those can also be remote working jobs. So we're not driving people to live in congested urban areas. And then lastly, the creative industries. So with artisans, the weavers, the textile makers, that are often forgotten in the sort of rush to modernize. There's such a market now for these beautiful crafts, and also for graphic designers, 3D printers, etc., that we want to help introduce them to better employers as well. So that's kind of the thrust, where seeing that there's such a gap between just the data, we want it to actually be applied on the ground, working with all the different sectors, and then actually connecting people to job opportunities, and hoping that we're able to share this with other countries, and happy to open source the model as well, just to provide more equity and dignity to all our different communities. And next slide. And that's where you can contact me. So yeah, we've got some big global events planned next year that I hope to invite everybody to and hope for your participation in. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all that you've shared so far, Selena, Janal, and Natalie. It's incredible hearing your stories and also thinking about, again, some of the universal and unique challenges that women truly face when trying to engage with OpenStreetMap and engage in some of this work. There's been a couple of questions that have come in through the chat so far, and a couple of questions that we wanted to address that came in ahead of our recording today. And I think this one will be a good one for us to get started, because somebody had asked in the chat about kind of your passion and what was it that made you passionate about kind of OSM. And I think that goes well with kind of this first question here about that maybe breakthrough or aha moment that you had where you really felt connected to this work and you were really driven by it. Just wondering if any of you might share kind of what fuels your passion or what keeps you engaged despite or regardless of all of the challenges, and what advice you'd share with other women who maybe are looking for motivation to stay persistent or to keep moving forward. I'm wondering if any of you want to kind of speak to that.
I could maybe start with, I'm sure they would, Selena and Natalie would have a lot to share as well. I think probably I can start with the breakthrough moment. So when I started with OSM, I was amazed as to how, such a wide range of contributors across the across the globe are actually making the map what it is. But my interaction was very limited to them, on, using the computer or via the internet. But when I actually went and attended one of these conferences and met folks, because one thing to say is that the folks that are online or who interact with is actually not just the community is so much bigger than that. And when you meet people who share their things across, when you put faces to the names, there's a huge realization that maybe what they're trying to say is not the same, because there's language barrier, there's cultural differences, and there's so much more. But when you actually speak to them in person, that changes everything, and you realize that there's so many people across who are doing so many different things, and by just being there you're able to learn. And that was when I actually realized that this is the place I want to be with. I want to spend more time, I want to explore and do different things, which maybe enable not just me but others around me who are also willing to do something similar. What I would advise, an advice that I would want to share with women, one would be that it's so easy for us to feel scared, because it's not in our comfort zone. But the way the way things work, if we just voice out and get that courage, and trust me, there are so many people, I would say allies, women, men, minorities, who are there to support you. It's just for us to raise the voice or share what we feel, and that's the first step towards getting there. That would be my advice. It's just overwhelming sometimes, but it's always nice to step up, and the amount of encouragement you get there is different.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica, for discussion. My breakthrough moment, I can say it was or it is my participation to the SOTM Brussels in 2016, because it was through this event that a lot of people started to know me, to know what my community and I have been doing in Mali. So it was a great moment for me in Brussels. So my advice for everyone, men and women, is that we need a passion to contribute to OpenStreetMap for the sustainable development of our community. So my advice for women especially is that we women, we need to be determined to overcome to all the barriers in order that we can achieve our empowerment. So we must be, we need to be, how I can say, we need courage, we need determination, we need passion to, yeah, to go forward, to overcome all the barriers. Thank you.
I guess my kind of aha moment was coming from when I lived in Asia and then having moved to Toronto, where there's just a wealth of funding and government funding and resources and just an abundance of everything. And someone gave me that expression, don't ask, don't get. And I've taken that to heart, saying, what's the worst that can happen? Someone can just say no. And before, you know, from being very quiet and meek to, you know, falling in love with the equity studies program at university in Toronto, that's where I really found my voice and was able to kind of articulate all the different questions I had. And that don't ask, don't get principle, I take all the way to the Philippines here, where I say, hey, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Someone can just say no, but you never should underestimate the generosity of people or to challenge kind of traditional ways of thinking and doing, because at this point in the world, you know, all hands on deck, we need all solutions we can get. So you have a voice and you absolutely have the right to be able to be heard, especially today.
Yeah, I think that's such a strong sentiment, Selena. So true for, I think, so many of us sitting on this call today and thinking about asking for what it is that we really want and need, and working hard and staying determined and passionate, like Natalie had mentioned, and continuing to move forward. And I think not just thinking about how we as an individual move forward, but how we also continue to move our communities forward as well. And thinking about how we can not just transform or change our own pathways, but also bring others with us along the journey too. And I think that kind of leads to the next question that I know has been one that's come up. It came up in a lot of the questions that people asked that they wanted to see addressed in the webinar. But thinking about that kind of larger community contribution, we know just how much it takes to really build an inclusive community, and that all hands on deck that you were just mentioning, Selena. What is it that you feel like are the tangential ways that the OSM community can encourage more women to participate? And I guess, how is it that we can really remove some of the barriers that we've seen that have prevented women from assuming the leadership roles or even just getting involved in some of the trainings? Are there any kind of tangential ways that you've either seen in your communities or ways that you feel like we can debate on the call for how it is that we can actually encourage and engage more women in OSM? Does anybody have any success stories or maybe ideas that you'd want to share?
Probably I can go again. So I think one of the things that generally I try to work around when it comes down to events that I organize, or even the university trainings, or generally any event that I'm running, is to actually address and like distinctively actually go ahead and reach out to people, because initially to even make that a theme or have more people participate, it is really important to proactively have that outreach and reach out to women participants or folks who can do. And the second thing would be that once they are there, to have an environment which is welcoming, because once that step is, once we overcome that, that makes it so much easier for them to participate, have a conversation, put forward or what are they thinking, their views, like instances where we're running a training session and there is interruption, where it's not necessary that it's a minority that's talking, but whoever is talking being a moderator, trying to ascertain the fact that okay, the person really wants to talk. So having an environment where they can have this conversation, especially when you're personally running these events, is really important. And when I talk about the larger community, I feel, in spaces like OSM, or it is important to make it welcoming, because honestly it is a little overwhelming, or when you're just starting off, because the community can be a little verbal. It has its own way to work, but having that welcoming, or at least having a safe space. So I think with one of the things that have come out is uh, the working group, the minority working group, to like support diversity working group, I'm sorry, to support more of this thing. And that could be a safe space to like bring about maybe initiatives or challenges that someone's facing, and then waiting for it, like some actions to be taken against. And some of the things which are personally very important to me is like having code of conduct for events. It gives a space, it makes sure that people are being you have a place to go, and these are things which are addressed. And when it comes down to selecting, or the panels having women or minorities also into that selection of talks, selection of panelists, or any conversation around it, would make a lot of difference, because then you'll have another perspective, and that could be held good. So these are few things which I personally follow when I'm running events, and when I go to events, I also look out for that.
Okay. As for me, what we can do to engage more women in OpenStreetMap, according to all the challenges we have, I think we need to sensitize first girl. We need to sensitize girl and women. We need to initiate special training program for them. We also need to set up, for example, economic model around OSM data reuse, so that they can live from OpenStreetMap projects. Also, it will be very useful if we can also prioritize sustainable development project. If women have some project, we can help them to make a sustainable project, and to help them find people who can fund those projects. So I think there are some strategies we can adopt to engage more women. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, echoing what Natalie said, I mean, we hear feedback all the time that women, in terms of data collection and in terms of mapping, really do excel in those kinds of skills. So being able to tie that to livelihood, I think, is a great idea. And in terms of the projects that we do, we usually hire mostly women, because they do tend to be more reliable and more conscientious with the data. And especially entering communities where there's an expression here where when a woman enters a community and she's a stranger, then that she's a bit more welcome, then they kind of are more suspicious of men when they're coming in and doing data collection. But I think I touched on this in my talk already, that actually most of my trainers are women in the workshops. I did notice a change in sort of the tone and the participation of the attendees, and also kind of the mood was a bit more relaxed, not just with attendees, but even with the trainers themselves. And then also being able to host events and workshops and really centering them on the participation of women. So I won't hold an event or a meeting if the key women that need to be there, or if more women that need to be there aren't able to attend. So we're not moving forward without them included in the process. As a whole, I know that for OSM, for usernames, we have started to ask women not to have a female sounding name for the username, because they do tend to get picked on, which kind of leads to a negative experience, which is a kind of a sad reality we have to deal with. But part of what we're beginning to do is create a program so that there is a more supportive environment towards new mappers, and particularly for women. So that's in the works, and we'll definitely share our findings and learnings as we move forward with that.
Hey, Selena, I do have like a follow-up question. I mean, more a curious question, because you said that, like having women trainers actually, I mean, makes it easy and but would you actually, support the statement that having women trainers also brings in a lot of women participants because they feel more inclusive, or it makes an environment that they can maybe, they're comfortable asking questions? Does that also impact?
Yeah, I mean, even for the participants themselves, what we find is when women community leaders invite their community, that has a much more diverse turnout versus when we ask male leaders, even though you might say that the NGO sector, I mean, in the Philippines, we're actually considered more equitable and there's more women in leadership roles here. But it kind of works both from the trainer side, that they do feel a bit disarmed, and especially because I'm careful with who I have interact with folks. So not just mappers, but even people that do the catering and the people that we usually support, like local artisans as well. Once they enter that front door, they feel welcome. And we don't use a lot of sort of technical language, and we also always say everyone is welcome. So just a lot of the language really helps. But yeah, across the board, women make everything better. So, it really has been transformational in the way that we work, and the way that we're received in communities that we're not from as well.
I agree, Serena. I think I personally also follow this. Like, if I'm in a room, I try to be like, instead of saying, "Hey guys," because it's very easy to say that, rather use folks or something which is more diverse and addresses everyone but one specific gender. And that has actually helped me personally to address folks, and others also to realize that there are others in the room.
Yeah, that's great to know. I think it's definitely thinking about some of the small ways as well as the large ways that we can start having that kind of transformative change. So you're exactly correct. There's small things that we can change in our day-to-day practices and our day-to-day interactions and behaviors as we continue to think about some of the larger scale change that we want to enact within our communities and our global community as well. I know we're coming to a close, so I wanted to open it up. We posted in the chat to see if there's other questions that you might have for our panelists here, and making sure that we can leverage their advantage and expertise and thoughts while we still have them on the line. So we're just going to monitor and check in on the chat really quick to see if there's any other questions incoming from any of our attendees. You do have one more, maybe we can get to one final question before we sign off for the rest of your morning, evening, or day, wherever in the world you are. So let's take a second. We're going to check in on the chat and see if there's any other questions. Please feel free to post them now, and we will close off with one final question for today.
There is a question about gender gap mapping.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Maybe, Selena, you can speak a little bit about the experience that you've had with that, and maybe if anybody else on the line has had any experience with how some of the map data that we're producing as kind of mapping communities might actually ultimately further some of our gender equality as well.
Yeah, the areas that we are mapping in Mindanao, they're quite rural and remote, and also because we work across the SDGs, while we're there, it really has to be time well spent. And so part of the study was related to transportation, so the differences in transportation needs between women and men. But then I also wanted to understand what they did for their households, what they did for livelihood, for education, for health, and their safety and security as well. So it was quite a detailed survey, 19-page survey, in fact, trying to get all that data. And so we really wanted to map out exactly what the differences were, and they were really astonishing. Like, we already knew that women did everything, but until it was quantified and qualified in that survey, it was kind of nuts, that there's so much that women do that's invisible, that's not included in any of the planning. And so that's kind of, we're taking that now to expand that further, and we're excited with how it's been received by a number of like local and international partners as well. Because again, if the goal is for economic prosperity and even disaster risk resilience and climate change resilience and food security, you really have to look at how we can best support women to even think of achieving that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Selena. I think we had a couple of other questions that came up too that might be somewhat related, but there was one question that came up in the chat that was focused on kind of reaching our most vulnerable women. So thinking about women who have either economic or financial barriers, who have maybe barriers related to direct violence against them for their community participation. Wondering if there's any kind of advice that you might give to communities who are trying to maybe reach more vulnerable populations of women, and how to navigate some of those very delicate spaces when it comes to women's participation in their community and in these activities. I know, Natalie, that was something that you'd mentioned earlier as being a barrier, and Molly as well. I'm not sure if any of you can speak to some of the experience that you've had in your own communities as to how maybe you've put some safeguarding practices in place so that women can participate freely and not be worried about their either emotional or physical kind of safety and well-being.
Yeah. I have some experience. I have personally some experience, and because when I start my community, we were only two women and about 10 men. So it was not easy for me personally to do something sometime, because every time was men were thinking that, like, I'm not able, I have not to lead them. So but I was already used to those things, because I was already involved in other community, in other organization with men and with women. So I was I can say I was already prepared to deal with some barriers, and so it was I was very determined. I was very determined to lead my community. So I can say things until now things are not easy, but I understand. Because men are educated here like the leader. So it's men thinks like they are the only people who must lead. Yeah. So that's what I can say about myself, my personal experience. Yeah.
And I think just adding on, not not a personal experience per se, but when I was interacting with a few of these community activists who were sort of using OSM data for like collecting information as to the roads which are lit or not lit, and then sharing that with folks such that they could help prevent violence or help folks avoid that. That's also something that has happened, and it is one of my friend in Bangalore who was sort of running that a while back. And so there are some of these organizations who are, I mean, trying to build these communities with help of OSM, because they can contribute this data, they can use this data for this particular thing, and it's free, and it's open to everyone. So it makes it easy for them to add these things which are not available elsewhere. So they're also trying to build such communities that support violence against women and so much more.
I did want to mention about, in terms of working with vulnerable communities, sort of the unintended consequences of mapping, where we're quite careful now, because oftentimes the most vulnerable communities are in some ways protected because they're isolated. But placing them on a map, planning a road into that community can really expose them to exploitation or further exploitation, or even worse. So we're definitely careful with being able to respect if communities want to be mapped, and also being careful with what we do with that data, whether we share that or not, because we live in different times these days. So.
Yeah, thanks for addressing those realities. I think they're really important considerations for us to make, not just when thinking about engaging women, but engaging vulnerable populations and communities at large. I know that there's a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but we are now 10 minutes past our hour-long dialogue and conversation. So what I wanted to do is first just thank each and every one of our panelists for dedicating a little bit of time today to share their narrative and their story. Hopefully there's something that resonated with you, or something that you'll be able to take and use as motivation to continue moving forward and thinking about what actions you can take as an individual, and what actions we can take as a community to keep pushing the dialogue and to keep pushing action for building a more inclusive community. We'll be uploading this presentation to our YouTube channel, and it is Facebook Live right now. So I know that there's also a couple of other questions that we didn't get to covering off on, but we'll make sure that you have the contact information for our speakers, so that if you do want to get in touch and hear a little bit more about their experiences, or collaborate in any way, you can connect with them directly. So at this point, I think we will say thank you for everybody who joined and jumped on, both here as well as on Facebook. We really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to come together and engage in this conversation, and hopefully tonight or this morning isn't the last time that we'll have some of these conversations as a community. So yeah, we'll follow up. We'll make sure that you have the information for all of our speakers, so that you can continue these conversations as we move forward. But thank you so much for joining our session today. We really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing what we can achieve together.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, everyone. Bye.
Merci beaucoup. Vous avez bien fait. Yeah,